Vault has been one of the top played Warframes for years now, and that's with good reason. This Warframe has some very fun weapon synergies, some of the most enjoyable playstyles in the game, and works great regardless of where you place him. With all the traction that other Warframes are finally getting, I want to pull you guys back in and show you what Vault can do in 2025. Oh, and before I get into the video, if you guys are enjoying my videos or you will enjoy this video, please consider subscribing as it helps me out a lot. I am a new content creator. To the guys that have subscribed, I've hit 1,000 and I can't thank you enough. Alright, let's get the basics out the way. His passive is outdated and useless. It builds up a tiny amount of damage, and that damage can be added to discharge, but discharge nowadays isn't really considered a nuke ability. It can be used for low elo nuke, but not very great in still path. Without a Shock Trooper, this ability is straight garbage. DE really needs to make Shock Trooper part of this ability without the augment mod, because abilities which are similar to Shock, like Smite from Oberon or Fireball from Ember, these abilities are just inherently very weak, and if the augment mod was added to them, this would be a very good quality of life change and make these abilities viable for other Warframes through the subsume system. Speed is Vault's bread and butter. This ability increases his sprint speed, multiplying your base sprint speed as well as your modded sprint speed. It also increases the melee attack speed and the reload speed of weapons. However, it does not affect the fire rate of these weapons like the Wisp buff would do. Electric Shield. This ability first and foremost blocks all damage coming directly at it. Any damage from the sides you will still take, but any damage coming towards you that will hit the shield will not be taken. The amount of damage this shield can block is infinite, so it's a very strong ability already. But to further add, any projectiles which go through the shield from your side will inherit a 50% electricity buff. Discharge. It mass stuns enemies, and with its augment mod, Capacitance, it increases Vault survivability a lot. A lot of people underestimate how good this augment mod actually is, so I will show you guys with the build that I use on how good it can actually be if used properly. Now, interesting things about the abilities that I just went over. The layer of electricity damage we get from Shock Trooper doesn't actually mix with the elements on your weapon, meaning if you have a heat status effect on your weapon, the electricity won't combine and make radiation. It will just add another layer of electricity damage on, which is very strong for status weapons. The shield increases the final critical hit damage by 2 times, which means if your weapon was to have a 10 times critical damage multiplier, it would make that 10 times critical damage multiplier into a 20 times critical damage multiplier, which is very strong. There is also a bug with this shield that hasn't been fixed for over a year now, and I presume that it's just a feature that DE maybe intended to add and just didn't want to tell anyone. But hit scan AoE weapons can actually benefit multiple times from the crit damage buff that we get from the shields, meaning that the critical damage multiplier can stack multiplicatively on hit scan AoE weapons. What are hit scan AoE weapons? They are basically weapons that when you fire a bullet, it doesn't take time for the bullet to travel and hit the enemy, it just instantly hits the enemy that's within your reticle. Alright, not to waste any of you guys' time, this is the build that I use on a day-to-day basis. I go for full comfort because I am a lazy Warframe player and I don't want to get on Warframe just to try hard. It's a chill game meant for chill play, as I always say, so every build that I will ever make will have a very chilled out playstyle. Eclipse is a subsume ability we will use, which gives us damage reduction. Now, why have I changed the first skill and not the last? Because Capacitance, the augment mod for our 4th ability, is very powerful for survivability, and it's going to help us stay alive and keep enemies around us constantly stunned. We use growing power for a strength increase. You can use anything else, but the increase from Molt as well as growing power together will give you an additional 85% power strength. For the Excellence slot, I would highly recommend Rush, since the speed multiplier we get from the ability increases the modded sprint speed as well as the base sprint speed. It will help you zoom past enemies. For our energy economy, we will have Primed Flow for an increase in energy capacity, and Archon Stretch for energy regeneration, as well as the 45% range we get from it. Along with that 45% range, we will use Augur Reach to give us an additional 30% range. Adaptation and our Eclipse will give us 2 layers of damage reduction, so our shields don't instantly break and they actually have the ability to tank a decent amount of damage. Blind Rage for our 90% strength, and lastly, the Capacitance Augment mod for loads of shields. The last mod honestly is entirely up to you what you want to put. I'll use Boreal's Hatred because I just like the additional shield, as well as the extra efficiency I get from it. But you can really use whatever you want. I would highly recommend Rolling Guard because it clears status effects and it gives you 3 seconds of immunity and it only has a 7-second cooldown. For our arcanes, as I mentioned before, we're going to use Molt Augmented and Arcane Energize to help us sustain our energy and give us an additional layer of power strength. Now, you're probably saying, hey Potato, how do I play this guy? Well, make sure your speed is always up. There is no reason why you wouldn't have this on. Make sure your Eclipse is always active with the damage reduction layer. If you feel like the enemies aren't doing much damage at all, you can just use the damage increase of Eclipse because it pairs very, very well with the critical damage. Use Discharge when your shields get low. Rely on Adaptation and Eclipse to help you tank the damage that you receive with the shields that you would get from Capacitance. And if your shields do break, you have a very long shield gate timer and recharge on demand. You have to press one button and your shields will all come back. And not to mention that everything around you will be stunned except Eximus units. Make sure your third ability, the shield, is always active and you're always carrying it. Before it used to drain energy, now it doesn't anymore, so there's no reason why you wouldn't run around with it. I would also recommend you guys use weapons that have a decently higher crit damage as well as a crit chance because they work amazing with the shield. Status weapons on this build don't do much because we have removed Shock Trooper and we use Eclipse in its stead. Therefore, it's better to just have higher critical damage and higher critical chance weapons because they scale better with the shield's 2 times critical damage multiplier. Now, one thing about Capacitance that a lot of people never take into consideration, as long as your 4th ability is active and doing damage to enemies, you will constantly be getting shields, which means if you're in a very dense crowd of enemies, as long as your 4th is active, you will constantly keep regenerating shields, which makes Vol in some cases practically unkillable. For companions, you can basically run anything you want. I would highly recommend you guys run something with Tenacious Bond and Seismic Bond for the increased critical damage as well as the increased fire rate. But there are a lot of other good companions you can use. The Panzer War Profiler is a no-brainer. You can have both the fire rate and the crit damage buffs on the Panzer War Profiler, and it can also mass spread viral for you. Another option is Nautilus Prime. With Cordon, the grouping is amazing. You can also again have the critical damage as well as the fire rate buff on you at all times. There is also another thing that a lot of people don't talk about. Guardian is a robotic companion mod which boosts owner's shield by 100% when it runs out. So basically when your shields are fully depleted, it will give you 100% of your shields back. This ability has a 40-second cooldown, but Manifold Bond can actually reduce the cooldown of this ability for every enemy that is killed with 3 or more status effects. There is another mod that you can have on only robotics, which is called Shield Charger. It increases the Warframe's max shields and energy regeneration by 60% for 10 seconds. Again, Manifold Bond decreases the cooldown of this ability. Subsume abilities, I'm not going to spend too much time on these because half of them are just self-explanatory. Raw. Now, I replace Shock Trooper for this ability because, again, this is a comfortable play style. I do not sweat in this game, and having 200, even a 300% electricity bonus isn't as valuable as just having an overall multiplicative damage buff from Raw. The good thing about Raw is that it works very well with the critical damage multiplier that the shield gives you, and when they mix together, your weapons do a lot of damage. That's my weapons platform build. The second subsume ability is Wrathful Advance. Now for this subsume, I replaced the shields. Why? Since we're using melees, we will constantly be in enemy fire and we won't really be using weapons much, so the critical damage buff is pretty useless to us. Since we'll be running around enemies, we'll be receiving damage from quite possibly all areas around us, and having capacitance is much better for survivability than the shield would be. And now why don't we replace Shock Trooper in this build? Because of melee influence. If you're going to use melees, it's best to use melee influence. Since Shock Trooper adds a layer of damage that does not mix with any other element and it's electric, that does all the melee influence proccing for us, and we don't have to worry about modding electricity on our weapon at all. So this is a great melee weapons platform. Pillage. Honestly, I don't know why anybody uses this ability on Vault. You don't realize, but you're getting rid of a much better ability for something that's not as great on Vault. Capacitance again provides us much better sustain as well as shield regen for the entire duration of when Discharge is active. The armor strip we get from Pillage also isn't great because you won't have very high power strength, and if you do, then that means you're losing out on something else. And even if you have, let's say, a 60% armor strip, the enemies are still left with around 1,000 armor, which is still an 80% damage reduction. So I would recommend everybody here to stay away from Pillage. Also, not to mention, whenever you cast Pillage, you lose shields, so it just decreases your survivability for absolutely no reason. Desiccation.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
This is probably one of the funnest vault builds I've ever played. You basically use the Kavats that Inaris' augment mod summons. You give them Shock Trooper, you give them the speed buff, and you just run around killing enemies while your Kavats are mass proccing corrosive, mass proccing electricity, mass stunning, doing a lot of damage, running around like crazy. It's a very, very, very fun build. If you guys haven't used this build, I would highly recommend it. The armor strip is much better than Pillage. Enemies are constantly being stunned. Electricity is being mass procced all over the map. It's just a very, very fun build that if you haven't played, you have to. If you want to use Nourish, you can. I'm tired of this ability, so I don't use it anymore. I try to find a different way to play Warframes now, and I've just now resorted to Eclipse because it's just a very comfortable way to play. But Nourish is amazing. You can spam Capacitance even more. You can completely ditch energy efficiency completely, and you won't have an issue. Now, I did say at the start of the video that Discharge isn't really a nuke ability. Well, that may be true, it's not entirely. There is a subsume ability that buffs the damage of Discharge by an insane amount, and that ability is Tempest Barrage. Tempest Barrage, with its augment mod, can max stack viral and max stack corrosive on enemies. Now, this already gives us a massive buff to our Discharge if enemies are grouped up together. However, there is a way that we can take the armor strip from 80% of 10 corrosive stacks to 100%. How do we do that? Well, we do that with a companion, which is the Panzer Profiler. The Panzer Profiler has an augment that you can put on called Tenacious Bond, where companions' melee attacks will armor strip 15% of the enemy's armor, and enemies that are recently damaged by abilities spread the effect onto other enemies within a 9-meter radius. Since Tempest Barrage as well as Discharge are ability damage, this armor strips every single enemy that is within vicinity. The damage is quite ridiculous. However, the only caveat of this subsume ability is that if enemies aren't grouped together, it doesn't work very well, and since we aren't using Nautilus, Cordon can't really help us to group enemies. For Archon shards, you can honestly put anything you want. The only thing I would highly recommend is a yellow Tau Forge shard for casting speed. If you don't have a Tau Forge, you can just use 2 regular ones. I have a shield and a duration shard with the casting speed shard. The other 2 I've kind of just left because I don't know what to put there, so I'm just being lazy. But you can use violet shards for equilibrium, and you can remove Arcane Energize, add something that gives you a bit more duration or power strength. If you are a cat gamer like I am, you can also add the violet shards to increase the ability damage to enemies that are inflicted with the electricity status effect. I hope you guys enjoyed that vault guide. It was very small. I didn't want to take too much time because you've probably already watched a ton of vault guides, but I just wanted to show you all the possible builds that you can have on Vault in 2025. If it's something you enjoyed, please consider subscribing as it helps me out a lot. I have a Nova guide that I recently released. Nova is honestly probably one of the best Warframes in the game. If you haven't watched that, you should definitely go check that out. If there's anything I missed, feel free to pop it down in the comments because it will help me and other Warframe players that might not have known. Anyway, that's enough yap. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.